Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Shelf Life. This is Simran, and this is my podcast, Shelf Life, where we talk about books, their philosophies, but most importantly, our personal relationship with the book. And we are back for another episode. It's been a hectic week. I'm not gonna lie. There's been a lot of running around. There's been a lot of pending work, but thankfully, it's all done now. And I have to admit, I've really started to look forward to this entire recording process as well, because it's towards the end of the week, and so to me it just signifies, the weekend and rest and just that time that I need for myself to just rejuvenate and then get back on track. With everything that I have to do. So it's really fun for me, and it's not that stressful anymore, which is great. And I also get to go through some of those books that I've always loved, and I get to read them again. I get to talk about them. And I also get to go back to all the lovely comments that you guys sent. And last week, I left you all with a very interesting question. I asked you guys to talk to me about your love stories, your first loves. I know it's very cliche. I get that it's, really romantic and emo, and but I can't help it. Okay, the book that we talked about was one of my favorites, and I could have easily done 2-3 episodes on it. But yeah, I asked y'all to send me stories about your first love and the first time that you thought you were in love with another person, or you were just in love. It could be anything. And the stories that I got to hear from all of you were really, really wonderful. And a couple of days ago, I put up the same question on my Instagram. If you want to follow me, my handle is @SimranMendon. And I got a lot of responses there as well. And I was just reading through them, and they're just beautiful. I really loved all of them. And I'm going to share some of my favorites. So some of the common ones were, the classic ones. The first time you fall in love is in school, of course. It's probably just a boy or a girl who's in your class, and you see them through a lot of all the benches between you, all the books and the notepads and the pencils and pens, and you see them through all of that. You make secret glances. You have these conversations that only you know the meaning behind, right? And it's just the most innocent thing in the world. I think it's the most innocent relationship that you will ever have. The first time that you find this kind of affinity for another person, and you're in school, you're young, you don't know anything, and so a lot of your stories were like that. They all had to do with a school crush or a school love, and that's quite similar to my experience as well. So yeah, I felt like I could relate to that, definitely. Some of the more interesting ones were obviously, some of you all said that it was with a teacher, and that really, gave me all the feels. Yeah, so a lot of you said that the first time that you thought you were in love or anything was when you saw this teacher who really got through to you, who really understood you, who really understood what you wanted to say, or maybe you didn't even have to say anything, but they just got you, and one of the really interesting ones again was a friend of mine who responded back to my story on Instagram and said that the first time they thought they were in love, I'm not sure if they meant it as a joke, but there was this teacher who drew like a star on his hand. You know how teachers used to do that when we were kids? They would draw stars on our hands to tell us that, we did something well, or they were proud of us or something like that. They approved. And he responded, and he said that it was when this teacher that he really liked drew a star on his hand. And I thought that was wonderful. But I have to admit that my favorite out of all the responses that we got, my absolute favorite, was from Akansha. And Akansha said that, and this really, really, it just melted my heart. She said that the first time she thought she was in love was when she walked into, she was around 8 or 9 years old, and she walked into a CD DVD store. We used to have that, right? Back in the day when CDs were a thing. She walked into a CD DVD store, and she picked up a CD of Shania Twain's hits, and she took that home with her. And she made her parents buy it, and she went back home and she listened to all of it, the entire CD, and she fell in love. And she's been a singer for close to 10 years now. She's been singing. And Akansha is, I know her, and she's a gem of a person, and she sings wonderfully. So that story really melted my heart for sure. And I don't know, I never thought of that, and that the first time you think you're in love could be with just a song, could be with a piece of literature, could be with art, with an idea, with God, with anything. It doesn't even have to have a human form. And yeah, just the mere idea of that, of just the fact that love has no form. It's amorphous. It's as amorphous as it can get. That idea is just beautiful. So yeah, thank you for all those responses, and I am so excited to get into the book that we have this week. Moving on, for The Unnecessary Woman, which is the book that we're going to be discussing today. It's a book written by Rabih Alameddine. I picked it up in the year 2018, if I'm not wrong. And I was very excited to read this one, because let me just explain to you what the book is about. Let me give you the premise of the book, right? So it's about this woman named Aliyah, and she lives alone in her Beirut apartment. She's lived alone for years and years now. She is husbandless, childless, fatherless, and she is also divorced. And she is considered her family's unnecessary appendage. That's how she thinks of herself, as an unnecessary woman. She has no friends. She has no social circle. She does not meet anyone. She does not talk to anyone. She lives by herself. And she lives in an apartment with the company of books. Only books. They are the only things that she speaks to, that she hears from, that check up on her, that ask her if she's all right. They're the only things that keep her warm at night, apart from, of course, all the memories that she tries to suppress from time to time. And she is absolutely alone, in the deepest meaning of that word. And it's the book about that journey of her and her aloneness. Sometimes that trickles down to loneliness, sometimes it doesn't. And the times when, the way that she carries out her life, the way that she finds a purpose to live with that loneliness, is by translating one book, a foreign language book, every single year. She spends the entire year translating that book into Arabic. and she keeps it for herself, and she does not share it with anyone. It's not like she publishes it. She does it for herself. She reads books for herself. She translates them for herself, and she keeps them aside, and she moves on to the next one. Nobody asks her why she did it. Nobody asks her what the purpose was. She just does it for herself. And that's essentially what the whole book is about. It's about this woman's journey. It's about Aliyah and her life, and why she is the way that she is, and what is going to happen to her life. And just the journey of it. To be honest, I mean, I thought about this a lot, and I think it's definitely not about what is going to happen to her. I don't think the book, under any circumstances, gives you that impression that it's going to predict what will happen to her in the end of her life, or how it is going to pan out. Never. I don't think that's what the book is about. And if you are someone who enjoys books that have that that element of, you know, what will happen in the end, if that's a question that you keep thinking about when you open a book, I do not think that this is a book for you. But nonetheless, I think you should definitely try it out, and you should definitely figure out for yourself whether you like it or not. So yeah, that's what the book is about. It's not a book about the end. It's not a book about the beginning either. It's in the middle, and the book stays in the middle for the entirety of it. And that's where the beauty is. It's in the middle. If I have to quote Jane Austen here, I can tell you that that quote that I really like. She says, "I was in the middle before I knew that I had begun." So yeah. And moving on, what I really wanted to talk about here is the fact that because this book talks about, it's widely considered as a love letter to literature. It's littered with quotes from other books. It's littered with references to other books. And if you are someone who's read a lot and who just loves the idea of reading in itself, then you will really enjoy this book, because Aliyah is exactly that. She is a woman who's read a lot, who spent her entire life reading. She might not have been the best daughter, the best wife, the best friend, but she was the best reader, and she read everything. And that's what it talks about. That it talks about the journey of reading, and also, on the other hand, the journey of writing. And that really got me to thinking that it got me to think about my journey with reading, of course, and also my journey with writing, because I do write. And this one question kept coming back to me when I was thinking about, when I began writing, why I began writing. As far as I can remember, I've been writing since the age of, I don't know, maybe 6, 7. I used to write really, really absurd poems. I don't even think I can call them that, but I used to write them when I was really young, and my poor mother would hang them up, would laminate them and hang them up in her clinic for everyone to see, even though they were absolutely absurd. But yeah, so I've been writing since the age of like 6 or 7. And I've been reading also, since the age of 6 or 7. I've always loved reading. And I keep thinking this all the time. Do I love to read, or do I love to write? Is there a difference? I don't really know. I mean, when I was reading An Unnecessary Woman, which references a lot of other books, and she talks about the art of reading, she talks about how she reads so much. Was I interested in the fact that she was talking about reading, or was I interested in just the fact that this is a book and look at the writing and how beautiful it is? I want to write like that. What were my thoughts? And that really got me to thinking. Do I read because I write, or do I write because I read? If it's one of my biggest dilemmas in life. And it's such a foundational dilemma is why I want to bring it up right now, because you might think that I'm just going on about my existential crisis, but it's actually such a foundational dilemma that I have, that when I think about what I want to do in my life and in the future and all of that, I really think about this. Do I want to spend my life reading, or do I want to spend it writing? And I say that as two different things because they are extremely different. If I choose to read for the rest of my life, I know for a fact that I will be a completely different person than if I choose to write. You know what I mean? I'm not sure if I'm able to frame my thoughts correctly here, but if I choose to read for the rest of my life, if I choose to be the kind of reader that I admire, I know that I will, I will become like an Aliyah herself. I will be like a woman living somewhere in the hills, all alone, surrounded by books. And I don't know about the whole no contact with the outside world thing, but I will definitely be that. I will be isolated. I will be in my own world, and I will be very happy. But if I do choose to write for the rest of my life, I know for a fact that I will want to be at the center. I will want to be where everything happens. There's that saying, I want to be in the room where it happens. I will want to be that person. I will want to be around people so that I can take from them and keep taking from them and pour them out on a piece of paper so that everybody can see. I will want to, drink good wine and have nights that never end. And, that life and feel as though everything is just magic. And it's not a life of isolation at all. So you see why this is a foundational dilemma for me, because it speaks of two completely different lives, and I genuinely do not know which one I would choose. And that's something that An Unnecessary Woman talks about a lot. In fact, I really want to read something from here. And the only way that I've been able to, I'm going to mention this here before I get into the quote, right? The only way that I've been able to maneuver through this foundational dilemma that I have is the only middle ground that I can find, the only answer that I can give myself is that what am I willing to put effort into? What am I willing to persevere for? Because achieving anything, living any kind of life takes patience, takes hard work, takes perseverance. And what matters, to me, to the extent that I will put in that amount of perseverance. And I can, I'm bringing that up here because unless this paragraph that I'm going to read about, it talks about something that is very similar, and I'm just going to read it out here. Poetry brought me great pleasure, music immense solace, but I had to train myself to appreciate. Train and train. It didn't come naturally to me. When I first heard Wagner, the noise was unbearable. But like a child with her first sip of wine, I recognized something that I could love with practice. And practice I most certainly did. It's not as if you're born with the ability to love Antonio Lobo and Tunis. I know. You think you love art because you have a sensitive soul. Isn't a sensitive soul simply a means of transforming a deficiency into proud disdain? You think art has meaning. You think you're not like me. You think that art can save the world. I used to. Why didn't I train myself to be a better cook? What was it all for? What good did it do me? What good is a personal skylight if I'm the only one who sees its light. And this is one of my absolute favorite quotes from any book that I've ever read, and it just encapsulates everything that this book stands for. You know, it is composed of that feeling that this woman Aliyah stands for, and that she is made of, and the fact that this book is an ode to all the women who write stories that they might never be a part of. You know, Aliyah spends every year of her life translating a book that nobody is ever going to read. She spends all her time reading and writing and dreaming and having all of these manic thoughts that nobody is ever going to know about, that she is never going to share. And if An Unnecessary Woman was in fact an autobiography written by Aliyah herself, it would never have been published. And that's very interesting to think about, that all of these women who have these stories to tell and never manage to say it. And they live and they die and we don't even know who they are. If I have to quote Vladimir Nabokov here, history will limit my life story to the dash between two dates. But there's so much more than that, right? So yeah, so that's the gist of the book. I mean, that's exactly what the book talks about, the dilemma of reading or writing. Do I live or do I read about people living their lives? You know, and that's something that comes up a lot. Do I live the life that people want to write about, or do I just read people living the life that I want to live? And what do I do? How do you go about this? How do you live? I mean, that's just the biggest question out there, right? How do you live? And for Aliyah in An Unnecessary Woman, that way of living makes sense. That isolation makes sense. That is something that she's used to. And for so many of us, I know so many of us that will just throw that around so casually, that, oh, I wish I could just go to the hills and live alone and be surrounded by books. I have thrown that around a lot, but do we really know what that life is about? Will we really know how to live it and live it well? So that's something that this book definitely talks about. It's also, at the same time, when I said that it's an ode to all the women who write stories they might never be a part of, it's also an ode to all the people who are different and outrageously so, and who've been different all their lives and perhaps were told that it wasn't the best way to be, that they should be something else. And when they tried and failed to be something else, they turned to art like all of us do. They turned towards poetry, they turned towards music, they turned towards literature. And that's where they found the truest expression of themselves. So it also talks about someone like that who could have turned to art, but perhaps, was too constrained by the times that they lived in and in the place that they lived in. Beirut and its society is written about in great detail. She writes about how, she was married to someone and the man was not the greatest man in the world, and she had, she had a very difficult relationship with her mother. She got married at 16. And it's a life behind the veil, and she can never come out of it, even if she wants to. So she does talk about that, and she talks about how you get an insight into how different she really is at her core, in complete isolation, just how absolutely outrageous her true self is. And that's true for all of us, right? We are all outrageous. When we're alone, we're all questionable. We all have questionable thoughts. We all have our own idiosyncrasies. We all have things that we're not proud of. But I genuinely believe that the greatest tragedy of living is that people who are different do not want to be different. And if all of us somehow found a way to be different without being scared, without fear, without shame, the world could be a really, really, wonderful place, but it's not. And that's something that I wish, we could work on, but that's another story. That's a that's a whole another episode in itself, right? So it's a book about the outsiders, the different ones, the mystics, the crazy ones, the ones that people don't understand, the ones who become writers and poets and artists and musicians, the ones who don't conform, right? The ones who, like, what is that beautiful quote? The ones who believe in the magic of the universe. I'm not sure who said that, but it is a very famous quote. It's a nod to all of them. It's a tribute to them and their souls and their perseverance, their practice, the courage that it takes to live a life that you want to live. And that you're not just living because you're obliged to, because you were told that you have to live a life. You're living a life not just because you're here and you better make something of it. You're not living a life because you want to make someone proud. You're living a life because you truly want to. You truly, truly want to. Every second of the day. And that's a very beautiful thought, right? I mean, I think it's liberating for sure. It's also hopeful. I think it's definitely hopeful to know that we have a say in what happens to us. We have a choice in what we do. We have a choice in where we end up. And for Aliyah, I think even though she is completely alone and isolated, and she does feel lonely a lot, even though she doesn't have that intimate connection with anybody, and she's only surrounded by silence and books, she is, in a very strange sense, extremely comfortable. She is extremely content because she had a say in where she ended up. And, things might have happened that didn't go the way she would have planned it. Of course they did. A lot of things happened that she wishes she could change, but she did have a say in where she ended up. She did have a say in who she became, and that is liberating. It can also be a burden, but for majority of the time it is liberating. So we shall go with that. Moving on, the book also has a very interesting quality. It highlights a very important element that I really want to talk about, because I know we talked a lot about LGBT relationships. We talked about homosexual relationships a lot, and I know we have discussed that at length, but there is another angle to it, because I think not a lot of people understand that there is definitely a plane of existence that is not entirely a heterosexual relationship or a homosexual relationship. I think it is definitely possible to be in love with a woman if you are a woman yourself and not have the label of, a homosexual relationship. I think it's definitely possible, and I've had quite a few conversations with like friends and stuff that about this, if they think it's possible to feel intensely for another woman or for a man if you are a man yourself, but not intrinsically feel that sexual connect with them, or feel that you need to be intimate with them, but you still feel like you're absolutely in love with them. And that's that reality, that idea is something that an unnecessary woman talks about as well. So Aliyah has this intense connect with one person in her entire life. She has that with a woman named Hannah, who is 15 years her senior. And, what happens to them is something that I would want you to get into when you read the book, if you decide to pick it up. I'm not going to ruin that for you. But it's something that is extremely interesting because Rabih Alameddine, he explores the love story between two women who were never actually, in the traditional sense, intimate with each other, who weren't intimate in the sense that their flesh touched each other. That sounds weird, but they weren't intimate in the sense that they needed that touch. They needed physical intimacy, but there was definitely some sort of love between them that was absolutely it was just too overwhelming. And what that love that could not be labeled, that kind of love, what that does to them later on, I mean, that's another story, and that is something that you get into on your own, but it's really interesting to see that. And I don't think I've read enough books that explores that relationship between, that love story between two completely, heterosexual men or heterosexual women. It doesn't explore that, because I do believe that, as a woman myself, as a girl myself, other women have had tremendous impact on me, probably more than men. And I have, personally felt like I learned so much more from women than I do from men. And that's not a bad thing. I know guys who've learned so much from other guys. And that's interesting because nobody really teaches us how to be comfortable with intimacy, right? Nobody really teaches us how to be completely comfortable with the same gender, and how to maneuver that complicated scenario. And it's sad, but when you read books like these, they really open up your eyes, and I think you definitely should educate yourself on this. And An Unnecessary Woman is a very interesting place to start from. So definitely check this book out for that reason. And before we wrap this episode up, I want to tell you a little story that I read. There's two stories that I really want to talk about. So one of them is, I was looking up interviews that this writer Rabih Alameddine did, where he talked about this book, because I hadn't read anything of his before, okay? And I really wanted to learn more about him because this book is absolutely phenomenal. And just the concept behind it, everything is just so beautiful, that I really wanted to learn more about him and how he managed to write this, especially when the entire book is a woman's narration and all of that. So there was an interview that he did, and it's just so hilarious and so beautiful, where he said that, the interviewer asked him, how did you write this book? I mean, you're a man, and you've never lived in Beirut yourself. So how did you write from the perspective of this crazy woman who just does impulsive things and lives on her own, and, is part crazy, part sane? How did you manage to do that? How did you get into the psyche of a woman? And he just said that this answer is just so brilliant. So, for a little bit of context, in the book begins with Alia, our main character. She has dyed her hair blue, and she's a pretty old character. She's not like a young a woman in her 30s or something like that. She's pretty old, so there's a little bit of context there. And she has just dyed her entire hair blue out of an impulse. Okay, and so while Rabih Alameddine is giving his answer, he just says that every day I woke up and I sat by my desk in front of my computer, and I took off my shirt, this blue shirt that I had, and I would put it over my head, and I would sit down with that blue shirt covering my head, and I would write. And I would imagine myself with blue hair. And I thought that was so brilliant. The idea that this man was writing, with a t-shirt on his head, thinking that he was a woman who had blue hair. And I don't know, it just that really stuck to me. And it goes back to all those, those stories that you hear about writers doing outrageous things to find inspiration and to finish their books. Ernest Hemingway, for example, got stark naked every morning and stood by his desk and wrote and put his paws on the desk and said, "This is how I'm going to write." And that's how he wrote his book. So the next time you pick up a Hemingway book, I want you to remember that. So that's that story. And to wrap up this episode, I want to leave you off with a question, like we always do. Why do we think this story was told? Why do I think the story was told? I think the story was told because there's an Aliyah inside all of us. There's a writer inside all of us. There's a reader inside all of us. And I think we all have a foundational dilemma. We all want to be monks who just, wander off into the Himalayas and spend their lives there just praying and detached from the entire world. And then there's a part of us that wants to be where it happens, that wants to be at the center, that wants to just drink poetry into existence, right? And that's something that we probably never really understand until our lives are over and we spend our whole lives trying to understand it, but we never truly manage to. So what we do is we just read the books that we have, we travel as much as we can, we pray as much as we can, and we try to make sense of whatever there is, whatever exists. And somehow, someday maybe, we might just end up like Alia, with books all around us, with silence to keep us warm, and with no one and nowhere to go, and completely 100% content. Thank you guys. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode. We will be back next week. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.